Evelyn emerged from the pastry shop and strolled towards the car, her eyes catching sight of her husband, Daniel, standing motionless on the sidewalk, gazing into the distance. She couldn't hide her irritation as she asked, "Daniel, why are you frozen? Come on, we're running late. Everyone's likely already gathered at the table, and we're the only ones missing." It seemed as though Daniel hadn't even heard her. Frustration mounting, she approached him and gently tugged at his sleeve. He gave her an odd, distant look before reluctantly making his way to the car. In the car, Evelyn continued to grumble, while Daniel's thoughts drifted back to a time when he wasn't married to Evelyn but to Liam, a quiet, modest, and loving woman. Liam had been his first love, and they had shared such happiness until Evelyn had entered his life. Liam's tragic demise in a senseless accident left Daniel utterly helpless, with nothing to offer but tears, heartfelt embraces with the coffin, and fervent pleas for Liam's forgiveness. Yet, even during those agonizing days of despair, he couldn't fully grasp the depth of his loss. After Liam's departure, happiness had eluded Daniel, even when Evelyn gave birth to their son. He perpetually felt like an outsider within his newfound family, often reflecting on the moment when everything had taken a wrong turn, likely the day Evelyn had arrived at the company where Daniel worked, elegant, long-legged, and impeccably dressed. Confidently, she raised her head high and made her way to her desk, carrying herself with the demeanor of someone more than just a staff economist, perhaps a director. At that time, Daniel served as the head of the department, and their professional interactions frequently required them to work late into the night, poring over documents. Then, one day, their relationship ventured beyond the typical boundaries that typically exist among colleagues. Evelyn took the lead in this unexpected turn of events. It was a late evening in the office, and both of them were diligently wrapping up the company's profit figures. Out of nowhere, Evelyn rose from her seat, elegantly stretching her limbs, and then she approached Daniel, settling herself onto his lap. "What are you doing?" he whispered in astonishment. Without a word, she skillfully loosened his tie with her slender, nimble fingers, unbuttoned his shirt collar, and gently pressed her lips against his. "Evelyn, I'm married," Daniel protested, but she persisted with bolder caresses. Daniel found himself unable to resist her advances, all the while carrying an immense burden of guilt as he thought about his faithful and loyal wife, Liam, waiting for him at home. With each secret meeting, his shame deepened. Then, one day, Evelyn dropped a bombshell. She was expecting a child. "Daniel, you have to make a choice between your wife and our baby. I hope the baby doesn't suffer for your decision." It was in that moment that Daniel finally realized the gravity of his actions. The passion Evelyn had skillfully ignited in him had nothing to do with love. That was a feeling he reserved solely for Liam, and he couldn't bear to lose it. He had betrayed Liam, but perhaps there was a chance for forgiveness. "Evelyn, I'm sorry," Daniel murmured. "Everything that has transpired between us has been a mistake. I won't abandon the child, and I'll support you, but my heart belongs to Liam, my family." Evelyn, known for her stubbornness, didn't shed a tear as another woman might have done. Instead, she smiled with a hint of vindictiveness and said, "So, you want to be a faithful husband now? Do you really think your wife will forgive you? Or has she forgiven you already? Does she have any self-respect left?" "No, I haven't spoken to her yet." Daniel shook his head sadly. "She's visiting her parents. I'll wait for her and tell her everything when she gets back." But Liam never returned. Just 2 days after that conversation, her mother called to deliver the devastating news that Liam had been in a terrible accident and had tragically passed away. As they laid Liam to rest, Mrs. Jones, Liam's mother, expressed her wish to be buried near her daughter, alongside Daniel. She added something more, but Daniel was lost in a haze of grief at that time, collapsing beside his wife's closed coffin and weeping bitterly, consumed by remorse for not protecting his beloved Liam and for the betrayal he had committed. Several years passed, and Daniel was now married to Evelyn. They were raising a young son together. Today, They had journeyed to a nearby town to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Evelyn's aunt's passing. As they arrived in town, Evelyn asked her husband to stop in front of a candy store, and Daniel, with his wife by his side, gazed around at the unfamiliar streets with a renewed sense of interest. Suddenly, his eyes locked onto the graceful figure of a woman stepping out of a shop on the opposite side of the street. A jolt surged through Daniel as though he had been struck by lightning. It was Liam, his Liam. The same Liam he had mourned for all those years. How many times had he secretly visited the cemetery, keeping it hidden from Evelyn, spending hours by his first wife's grave, conversing with her as if she were still among the living. And now, here she was, alive before him. Daniel longed to rush towards her and call out to Liam, but the words froze on his lips, and his feet felt as though they were rooted to the pavement. The shock was overwhelming, rendering Daniel utterly immobile. Just as Evelyn returned to his side, he had to summon an incredible effort to rejoin her in the car, devoting himself to his overwhelming flood of memories. He could barely keep his focus on the road as they drove back to the house. Once they arrived and Evelyn's family gathered around the table, Daniel explained to his wife that he wasn't feeling well and retreated to one of the rooms to rest. Finally alone, he allowed himself to become consumed by his thoughts. A happy family life with Evelyn had never truly fulfilled him. She possessed a strong will and a firm stance, unaccustomed to yielding to the opinions of others. The first 2 years of their son's life had been a tumultuous ordeal for Daniel. He had hoped that Evelyn's pregnancy-related whims would subside after the baby's birth, but little did he know, it was only the beginning. Evelyn insisted that Daniel respond immediately at the slightest sign of trouble, often disrupting crucial negotiations. One day, she implored him to hurry home without providing any details over the phone. Filled with anxiety for their child, Daniel raced home, the wheels of his car seeming to barely touch the ground. To his astonishment, a smiling Evelyn greeted him at the door. "You're here. How wonderful," she exclaimed cheerfully. "I missed you so much. What's wrong with our son?" Daniel blurted out, his patience wearing thin. "Nothing. He's sleeping. What could possibly happen to him?" "Evelyn, what were you thinking? Do you realize I had an important meeting, and I dropped everything to rush over here?" "That's good. It means you love me," Evelyn laughed in response. But the truth was, he didn't love her. He had never loved her. There was only Liam in his heart. But was Liam truly gone? The thought overwhelmed Daniel, causing him to sit up abruptly on the couch. He hadn't witnessed Liam's passing. The coffin had been closed, and the funeral had felt somehow surreal. It was only now that Daniel began to see the situation from a different perspective. Liam's mother hadn't shed a single tear, and he had initially attributed it to shock. However, his thoughts left him drained, and he sank back onto the couch. When Evelyn approached to inquire about his well-being, he had already formed a plan. "Evelyn, I'm sorry, but I need to leave right away," he said. "Wait, tomorrow night we're supposed to go to a restaurant. It's my aunt's anniversary, and there will be a lot of guests." "I'll do my best to make it," Daniel promised, despite his wife's disapproval. He got into the car and drove off. Along the way, he stopped at a hardware store, purchasing 2 shovels, a pair of gloves, and a flashlight. Arriving at the cemetery where Liam was laid to rest, it was already quite dark. Daniel followed a familiar path to his wife's grave and began to dig. Unaccustomed to physical labor, he quickly developed blisters, but that didn't deter him. Hour after hour passed, and Daniel continued to dig, pausing only briefly to catch his breath. At long last, the shovel struck the lid of the coffin, and Daniel let out a heavy sigh. It was only then that he grasped the impossibility of bringing the entire coffin to the surface. His nerves and physical strength had reached their breaking point, so he made the difficult decision to open the lid right there within the grave. The shovel made contact with the partially decayed boards, creating a significant gap in the coffin. With great effort, he managed to tear off the lid, and his tears flowed freely as he realized he had been digging up the past, not the present. Inside the coffin, Daniel discovered a broken and decaying wooden box, which he had once gifted to his wife. It had been where she kept all the tokens of his affection, a repository of their love. This discovery held a painful truth: it wasn't his wife he had buried that day, but their love and happiness. After retrieving all the belongings from the grave, Daniel somehow mustered the strength to fill the grave again. Crushed by the weight of what had transpired, he made his way to the exit and succumbed to exhaustion. He sat in the car, took a sip of water, and promptly fell into a deep slumber without leaving the cemetery. Later that evening, Evelyn grew increasingly frustrated as she realized Daniel had not arrived on time. She went to her aunt and offered an apology for her husband's absence. "I didn't expect anything different from him," the aunt remarked with a knowing grin. "You know, I never really cared for your Daniel." "He's nothing like Owen," remarked the aunt. Evelyn responded, defending her husband, "Auntie, please. You must understand that Owen wasn't as adaptable as Daniel. When Owen learned that I was pregnant, he insisted I get an abortion. But I had already undergone the procedure a few times, and the doctors warned me that this might be my last chance to become a mother. I couldn't let it slip away, and I also wanted to get back at Owen. So, I turned my attention to Daniel. Oh, if you only knew how furious Owen was when he found out I was dating Daniel." The aunt, wearing a sly smile, inquired, "So, Daniel has no idea he's raising a child who isn't his?" Evelyn responded confidently, "Of course not. He's so trusting." Unbeknownst to them, as they conversed, Daniel approached from behind, holding a large bouquet of flowers. "Well," he interjected, "it's a relief that nothing needs to be explained now." Evelyn, taken aback and bewildered, whispered, "Daniel, you've got it all wrong. Let me explain. I was wrong before, and now it's all starting to make sense." "Happy birthday," Daniel offered as he presented the bouquet of anniversary flowers. He then turned and began to walk away. Evelyn rushed after him, grasping his arm, and pleaded with him to listen. However, he calmly removed the tearful woman's grip, and in that moment, Evelyn realized she had committed an irreversible error. Daniel proceeded directly to Mrs. Jones' house, carrying the pressing question that had been tormenting him. "Is Liam alive?" he asked with a determined tone. "Don't remain silent, Mrs. Jones. I know everything. I saw her, and I even checked at night to make sure she wasn't in that coffin. I have loved your daughter, and I've loved only her all these years." Mrs. Jones, stern but understanding, responded, "Daniel, if you truly loved her, you wouldn't have betrayed her." Filled with shame, Daniel looked up at her and questioned, "How do you know that?" She recounted an evening when Liam had come to visit her. "She received a phone call," Mrs. Jones continued. "It was from your mistress, who informed Liam that she was expecting your child and that you loved her. Liam didn't say anything to me at the time. She simply went into her room, and she was absent for a long while. Concerned, I went to check on her and was horrified to find her holding a handful of pills. Some had already been taken. I immediately called an ambulance to save my precious girl. Do you realize how close I came to losing her?" Daniel sat with his head bowed, absorbing Mrs. Jones' words. She continued unflinchingly, "Oh, Daniel, if only you knew how deeply she loved you. Then, in the hospital, she kept saying she didn't want to go on," Mrs. Jones explained. "I suggested that she should talk to you, but she decided that since you had chosen someone else, she wouldn't trouble you. You see, she made the choice to set you free. Right or wrong, I supported her, even though I knew that someday the truth would come to light, and you would discover it." Daniel, now eager to find Liam, inquired, "Where is Liam now? I want to see her." Mrs. Jones, with a plea in her voice, responded, "For what purpose, Daniel? To cause her more pain. Please, don't disrupt her life." I won't give her up to anyone, she insisted, and I'll do whatever it takes to make her forgive me. Daniel shook his head firmly and declared, I won't give up on her. I'll do anything to earn her forgiveness. Mrs. Jones sighed and reluctantly provided her address. When the doorbell rang, Liam opened it and immediately turned pale. Standing before her was Daniel, her first and only love, someone she had never managed to erase from her memory. They gazed at each other in silence, their eyes locked and unblinking. Finally, Liam gathered herself and asked, Why has he come? To tell you that I love you, and I always have, Daniel declared earnestly. I made a terrible mistake once, and I can never forgive myself. Liam, I beg you every day to forgive me. Liam remained skeptical, saying, Go away. I don't believe you. You killed our love, and I buried it. Daniel then revealed a significant proof of his love, showing her photo albums and a scarlet box that she had once buried. But Liam remained resolute. Please, Daniel, go away. I won't ruin your family. You have a child. No family, no baby. She betrayed me. He's not my son. Daniel insisted, It doesn't change anything. Please, give me a chance. Liam replied bitterly and closed the door on him. Daniel, however, refused to leave. He sank to the floor, his back against the wall, wrapping his arms around his knees. He knew he would do anything to win Liam back, sensing that behind the door, she might be going through the same torment, sitting on the floor and listening to her wounded heart. 3 years later, Daniel and Liam were walking in a park near their house, not far from the home they had rebuilt together. Their son, Sam, peacefully slept in a stroller that Daniel gently pushed ahead of them, a symbol of their renewed love and commitment. He wrapped his other arm around his wife's newly rounded waist, holding her close. Pearling, I can't believe how fortunate I am to have you in my life, Daniel said, pausing to tenderly kiss Liam. I've been so foolish and blind, but I'm willing to do anything to ensure your happiness and the happiness of our children. Liam returned his affectionate gaze and replied, And I love you, Daniel. You know, those few terrible years without you were so painful. Please, let's not dwell on the past, Daniel implored. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. Liam smiled, locking eyes with her husband, and said, Well, everyone makes mistakes in life. Daniel nodded, adding, Yes, but not everyone can forgive. He held his wife close once more, cherishing the second chance they had been given at happiness and love.